Joining us now, Bob Weiner. Bob's a White House correspondent like me. He's a radio, TV commentator like me. He's an op-ed columnist. He's got over 800 op-eds in major papers. He's a former spokesperson for Clinton and for Bush, and he was also a former spokesman for four-star General Barry McCaffrey, and he's got quite the resume. And now he's president of Robert Weiner Associates News and Solutions for Change Foundation, and he's been very involved in the getting young people involved in both voting, the political system, and media, and he's a great mentor, and he's with us now. Bob, always good to have you, man.
It's a pleasure, John, but nobody is like you. You have a very exciting radio show, and I'm thrilled to be on it. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks, Bob. Hey, let's get to some interesting things here. You've got an op-ed out, and you want to on New Zealand's assault weapon ban. Of course, this was after the massacre there. Kind of amazing is the entire government. I think one person voted no. The entire parliament, their prime minister, they just passed a gun law in like a week, and assault weapons gone, reacting to that shooting. Something that you could never even get to the first part of the debate in the U.S. It's so polarized on that. How do they do that?
Well, you just summarized the op-ed, John, and to me it was amazing. 6 days after their first mass shooting, they passed the assault weapons ban, working with hunters who also wanted to see that happen, because what happened there was an assault to gun owners' integrity. And so you really can't understand in the United States how 19 of the last 20, including this last guy, which was only quote unquote, right, one killed, but all of the 20 the 20 mass murders with 10 or more killed in the United States since Columbine, 19 of 20 with assault weapons that Clinton had banned, but the NRA sunsetted, and how we can't pass that in the United States is amazing to me, and that's why it's such a big issue to the Parkland kids, and that's why there was one of the reasons there was this huge turnover of 40 seats and a flip in the Congress in the 2018 elections. So that's an issue that the United States and, to be honest, Republicans deny at their own peril if we go nowhere further before the presidential election.
So let me ask you this, Bob Weiner. I think this is a legit question here. The NRA went from a grassroots organization to now it basically is a major corporate-driven, hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying group, right? They've changed. What do you think of the kerfuffle that went on there at their annual meeting where Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, of course, we're in Virginia, everybody knows him, ran for Senate, and he's a big name here. He became their president to help their fundraising efforts, get a big name up there. He gets into a dust-up with Wayne LaPierre, who's been there, Bob, like 40 years or something. I think
over 45.
Wayne started like at the bottom as like an intern. I mean, he's got a lot of power. So then he writes a letter to the board saying that there was financial impropriety, and LaPierre spent $200,000 on suits. And then LaPierre wrote a letter to the board and saying Oliver North basically didn't do crap. And then they oust
it's
North.
Obviously internal fighting among two huge names in the field, and Oliver North being a huge name, although don't forget he was a convicted felon for what he did on Iran-Contra, but that's a separate issue. But Wayne LaPierre, John, when I was Ed Koch's legislative assistant in Congress in 1974 and 75, Wayne LaPierre rolled through on behalf of the NRA. He's been there forever, and he has such a strong base in that organization that I was amazed that he wiped out Oliver North in the politics inside the organization. But it's unfortunate that the leadership of the NRA, you saw what happened in New Zealand, doesn't reflect the gun owners of America who are decent people. Hey, I've got my sharpshooter bar too, from summer camp when I was a kid. We all love the concept of firing rifles, and certainly there's nothing wrong with hunting. But there's something very wrong with using military weapons to go into schools and synagogues and churches and kill people because you're a hate crime person. That's very wrong, and we can do something about it, and we have not. And it would take away the biggest headlines in the gun issue. That issue would go away if we banned assault weapons, because you take away the biggest headlines. Then you're down to smaller, very, very smaller numbers of people being killed.
Bob, let me ask you this. When we had the assault ban, and I think that was put forth, that was the in Congress, that was DIFI, right, if memory serves me, Dianne Feinstein from San Francisco. I think it was her legislation. Clinton signed it. Was there a drop-off in this type of stuff?
Yes, there was. The numbers show a drop. The mass murders dropped during the assault ban. So the answer is yes. And the argument you get, John, is, it's only a small percentage of the crimes, and there's Chicago and handguns and all. Yeah, there's everything else. So it only affects 2% of, but that 2% is the headlines, and you and I are the media people, right?
Right.
That's everything. The headlines is how you get America all riled up, and so if you pull that away, you've really accomplished something positive for unity in the country.
All right, we're with Bob Weiner. So, Bob, what all my gun owner listeners say is, look, it's incrementalism. It's why I was in favor of getting rid of the bump stock. I think that's ridiculous, but a lot of my listeners are like, John, this is how it starts. They take the assault weapons, then they take the bump stocks, then they take your rounds, then they limit this, then they limit that, then they take your guns, and then you're subjects of the government. How do you respond to that?
Everything is incremental. Everything is fear-mongering about what might happen. Everything that the Democrats now want to do is socialism, right? No, Medicare, people say, don't make my health care socialist. Medicare is sort of socialist, and people love it. So, that's such a false argument. The purpose of government, and maybe we'll differ on this philosophically, John, but the purpose of government is to make sure things don't get screwed up among the values that you do have. And that's what this would be. This would be, you don't allow cannons in people's houses. So the Supreme Court actually has never stopped the kind of weapon that Congress would legislate. That's the proper role of Congress.
So William in Chesapeake texts in, he says, ask this guy, Bob Weiner, what is an assault weapon? Like, how do you define an assault weapon?
Machine gun. You don't need that to kill a duck.
All right, so you would be in favor, as Clinton and Feinstein did, of banning anything like under the jurisdiction of fires multiple rounds. Quickly. But how would you define that? Like what? I mean, is there...
John, I am not going to be the expert on the technology of what was in the Clinton ban that worked. The experts can define it, and hopefully they won't make loopholes that you can drive trucks through. But we've had it legislatively. We can go back to it legislatively. The NRA forced that in there to have a sunset provision.
Okay, let's get to I got to go to a quick word from our sponsors. Bob Weiner, stay with us when I get back. I want to talk about Joe Biden's apology loser tour, why Elizabeth Warren, as I predicted, is flopping, and basically her days are numbered. And then Mayor Pete, everybody's new darling.
Right.
And then there was I saw something that came on him the other day, but I don't think it was verified. I'll be right back. All right, you're back with John Fredericks, your Godzilla of the Truth. We're with White House correspondent, TV, radio commentator, Robert Weiner. Robert also does a great job with young journalists, mentoring them, bringing them into the fold. And he's got an organization that is absolutely invaluable to the future of our business, and we thank him for that. So, look, Bob, you got a lot of reaction here from some of our listeners. I'm going to get to politics in a minute, but let's see. One text here is Weiner just referred to hunting as a purpose of owning guns. The purpose of owning guns is to stand up to an overbearing government that wants to turn you into subjects. That's the object of the Second Amendment, not to hunt. That's one comment. Another comment, Tim in Virginia Beach says, we already don't have military assault rifles. Machine guns are already illegal, so I don't know what he's talking about. What he wants to ban can't be used in a war, and et cetera. I go on, but I want to get to some other topics. So you've certainly sparked some debate here.
I would just say one thing, John, and make sure your listeners understand that the vote that said it didn't just have to be for a militia, which actually is what the Constitution says. If you read it, everybody forgets that defining phrase for the right to bear arms was 5-4. 5-4. So this is not a given, and this is all a matter of discussion in terms of how we have that right. But also, Congress has been given the right to define what weapons are in people's hands. As I said a little bit earlier, you don't allow cannons in houses. So the Congress has always been given the right to define which weapons.
All right, let's get off that. Let's get to the Democratic primary, Bob. I have already made my prediction. I think Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee, and I don't think you're going to be able to steal it from him in Milwaukee like you did. And I think he's going to win Iowa and win New Hampshire, and that's the end of Beth Warren and Biden. But having said that, let's get to the Warren campaign, and then we'll get to Sanders. I mean, she came out, she's a lot of fanfare. I mean, just a flopperoo. Oh, what's the deal with this?
Well, Buttigieg has stolen her thunder, but let me just say about Biden. I was in his kitchen when he announced for Senate, and I remember that we had a portrait unveiling on the Hill and for the Judiciary Committee, and he walked by, and I turned to my wife, Pat, and I said, I was in his kitchen when he announced with him when I was the head of the youth vote registration for the Democratic Party at the Watergate. Biden swung around, looked at Pat, and said, "That's exactly right. I've known him forever." And he is such a candid, earthy guy. One of the phenomenons, John, is the flop of the people trying to make him like he was some sexual pervert because he kissed some gals to say hello, which was maybe creepy but not sexual. And he's learned his lesson. So he's surging now. That has reversed, and he is surging. People see him. The polls that just came out today show that people by 3-1 think that he's the one who can win. And that's what Democrats care about most because of the horror story of the model of this president being a model for our kids and for the rest of the world. And don't say there wasn't any Russia risk in terms of sharing polling data and all of that. So the people just don't want – that was the number one issue in the 2018 election was not Trump, and health care was second. And Sanders – by the way, the reason he is doing so well and sustaining is because all of the issues that he brought out are now perceived as mainstream, health and education and tax fairness and all of that. That it's all perceived as mainstream in the Democratic Party and across the country. So he is doing well. But I don't see him because it's coming out that Medicare for all just is a flop even in Vermont. It costs too much because health care has risen so much. And where the Democrats are going to have to go with that and where Biden is and where a lot of the candidates are is let's fix the Affordable Care Act. Let's support the exchanges. Let's stop the costs. But let's not destroy health care to save it. So there's a lot of feeling about, and even Pelosi is saying that now. So I think you'll see a lot of flurry with Medicare for all as sort of aspirational. But I think where we're going to go is fix the Affordable Care Act. And I think no matter what the Democrats say and do, that's probably where legislatively, if they were to take over the House, the Senate, and even the presidency, that's probably where it's going to go.
Well, Bob, I know you're anxious for a candidate to defeat Trump. So Biden goes to Pittsburgh yesterday and talks to union workers about a $15 minimum wage. Of course, none of those make $15. When he was vice president, unemployment in Pennsylvania was 6.5%. Now it's 3.9%. Unemployment when he was vice president in Pittsburgh was 5.9%. Now it's 3.2%, and wages have risen. I mean, you know what? And by the way, he had to apologize. I guess he started the Biden apology tour. Creepy Joe. He starts out by saying, "I never said anything to offend or wrong to Anita Hill." Then the millennial Twitter, social media whacktivist crack him over the head. And he comes out yesterday and says, "Well, I did say I do have to apologize to Anita Hill." When is he going to apologize for being a white male?
Well, I wrote a piece saying about Biden has to apologize to Anita Hill, and then before the thing got published, 5 hours later, he made the phone call and apologized to Anita Hill. and she respected the call. What he has to do, though, John, is he has to say he should have allowed the extra witnesses that Anita Hill wants, the same as Kavanaugh and Dr. Blasey Ford deserved, and that's why it was a 2-vote margin, don't forget, only deserved the extra witnesses for corroboration that they never really investigated and let her have. That was the mistake that Biden made. He's got to recognize that, and I think he will recognize that. He has to come out. Otherwise, he's going to be twisted and turned until he says that.
Bob, Bernie Sanders is going to be the nominee. You're not going to steal it from him again in Milwaukee. And I don't take Bernie lightly. I really don't. I mean, I predicted he was going to beat Clinton before they went to Iowa in 2016, and he would have beaten her had your party not stole it from him. If he goes to Milwaukee with a lead, you're not going to be able to steal it from him. The Bernie people are going to go absolutely berserk. That's your problem. You're going to have to beat him. You're not going to beat him in Iowa. You're not going to beat him in New Hampshire. Joe's going to go 0 for 2. I guess you got to get him in South Carolina and then maybe in the South. But then he's going to come back and win all those Midwestern states. That's where he beats Biden and knocks him out of the race. I got to go. John Fredericks Radio Network. Bob, always great to have you, man.
Hey,
let's have you back on a regular basis so you can
Sure.
update us on your thoughts on the Democratic primary as it unfolds.
Yep.